"You have a visitor, Soren." The nurse's voice was gentle, the way people speak when they have already started mourning someone who is still breathing. But Soren did not look up from the window. He was watching the courtyard 3 floors below, where a man in a charcoal suit stood perfectly still beside a black sedan, one hand pressed to his face, shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that does not make sound. Even from this distance, Soren could tell he was an alpha. It was something about the breadth of him, the way even in collapse he occupied space like the world owed him room. But it was more than posture. Even through the sterile hospital air, through the layers of antiseptic and recycled oxygen, Soren caught something impossible. A whisper of smoke and winter pine, sharp and clean, threading through the vents like it had been looking for him. His monitors beeped a fraction faster. His fingers curled against the windowsill, and for the first time in 312 days of living inside these walls, Soren Park felt his heart do something other than simply keep him alive. "Soren?" the nurse tried again. "I heard you," he said softly, still watching the man in the courtyard below. "Who is he?" "Who is who, sweetheart?" "The alpha. Down there." The nurse crossed the room and glanced out the window, then pulled back with wide eyes. "That is Kale Mitsuhashi. His mother is in room 417. The room directly next to Soren's. The nurse hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "She does not have long." Soren pressed his palm flat against the cool glass. He understood that particular brand of anguish better than most, the kind where you sit beside someone you love and watch the machines do the breathing for them while you bargain with anything that will listen. He had been on both sides of that equation. "How long has she been here?" he asked. 3 weeks. He comes every single day. Morning and night like clockwork. Never misses." Soren watched Kyle Mitsuhashi pull himself together below. Watched him straighten his tie, square those massive shoulders, and walk back toward the hospital entrance with the posture of a man who refused to let the world see him fracture. Something about that quiet discipline made Soren's chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with his diagnosis. "Your visitor, Soren," the nurse reminded him. He finally turned from the window. "Tell Dr. Ando I will do the blood panel tomorrow. I am tired today." The nurse gave him the look. The one that said tomorrow might be different than you think, but she nodded and left him alone with the fading trace of winter pine still caught somewhere in his lungs. "Hey, welcome to Moonlit Episodes. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now back to the story. The first time Kel Mitsuhashi noticed the scent, he thought he was losing his mind. It was a Tuesday in late October, and he had just stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor of St. Eliot's Medical Center, carrying a bag of persimmons his mother could no longer eat. The oncology ward smelled the way it always did, like industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. But underneath it, so faint he almost missed it, was something else entirely. Honey and white ginger. Warm, like sunlight trapped in glass but threaded with something fragile. Something that made his alpha instincts snap to attention for the first time in years. He stopped walking. His hand tightened on the bag until the plastic crinkled. Around him, nurses moved in soft shoes, machines hummed their mechanical lullabies, and somewhere down the hall, a television played the evening news at low volume, but Kale could not hear any of it. Every cell in his body had gone silent, straining toward that impossible sweetness, like a compass finding north. Then it was gone, swallowed by antiseptic and recycled air, and Kale stood in the middle of the hallway feeling like someone had reached into his chest and rearranged the furniture. "Mr. Mitsuhashi?" A nurse appeared at his elbow. "Your mother is awake. She has been asking for you." He blinked, shook his head once, hard, like clearing water from his ears. "Thank you. I am coming." He spent 2 hours at his mother's bedside that evening, reading to her from a novel she had loved when he was a child. Kimiko Mitsuhashi had been a force of nature once, the kind of Omega woman who ran a household and a charity foundation simultaneously while making it look effortless. Now she weighed barely 90 pounds, her silver hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink, her hands so thin Coyle was afraid to hold them too tightly. "You look distracted," she said, her voice like paper rustling. "I am not distracted. I am reading." "You are reading, but your mind is somewhere else. I raised you, Cale. I know the difference." He closed the book and set it on the nightstand. "How are you feeling today?" "Like a woman who is dying," she said, and when he flinched, she reached for his hand with surprising strength. "Do not do that. Do not pretend with me. We agreed." They had agreed. 3 weeks ago, when the doctors had finally said the word terminal out loud instead of hiding it behind phrases like aggressive progression and limited options, Kyle and his mother had made a pact. No pretending. No false hope. Whatever time they had left would be honest. It was the hardest promise Kyle had ever made. "Tell me about the company," she said, settling deeper into her pillows. "Tell me something that is not about this room." So he did. He told her about the Osaka acquisition, about the new sustainability initiative his board was fighting him on, about his assistant Ria, who had accidentally sent a company-wide email meant for her husband that simply said, "Pick up milk. Do not forget this time or I will end you." His mother laughed at that, a thin, reedy sound that was still the most beautiful thing Kyle had ever heard. By the time visiting hours ended, her eyes were closed and her breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of morphine sleep. Kyle pressed a kiss to her forehead, gathered his things, and stepped into the hallway. The scent hit him again. Stronger this time, or maybe he was just more attuned to it. Honey and white ginger, with something underneath that he could not name, something that made his pulse drop low and heavy. He turned his head instinctively, following it like a thread. Room 4. 18. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see the edge of a hospital bed, the blue glow of monitoring equipment, and a slender hand resting on a white blanket. The hand was attached to a wrist wrapped in a medical ID bracelet, and the wrist belonged to someone Coyle could not quite see from this angle. Just that hand, those long fingers, and the devastating sweetness pouring through the crack in the door. His feet carried him 2 steps closer before his brain caught up. He stopped, forced himself to breathe through his mouth instead of his nose. What was he doing? He was a 41-year-old Alpha CEO, standing in an oncology ward at 9:15 at night, leaning toward a stranger's hospital room like a dog on a leash. This was grief. This was exhaustion. This was his body misfiring because watching his mother die had stripped every defense he had built over 2 decades of discipline. He turned away and walked to the elevator without looking back. But in the car on the way home, with the city light smearing past the tinted windows, Kyle pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose and admitted something to himself that he had not admitted in 20 years. He was lonely. Profoundly. Catastrophically lonely. And for 3 seconds in a hospital hallway, that loneliness had answered to a scent that did not belong to him. Soren Park had been dying for 8 years. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, methodical cruelty of a body that could not decide whether to keep him or let him go. The diagnosis had come when he was 21, halfway through art school with a portfolio full of watercolors and a head full of plans that would never happen. Idiopathic progressive autoimmune deterioration, the doctors had called it. His body was attacking itself, slowly dismantling its own systems like a house pulling out its own nails. The Omega biology made it worse. His designation, which should have been a source of strength, had become a liability. The autoimmune response targeted his pheromone glands, his bonding receptors, his heat cycle regulation. Every biological system that made him Omega was also the system most under siege. He had not had a proper heat in 4 years. His scent, which his mother used to say smelled like her grandmother's ginger tea, now fluctuated wildly. Some days it barely existed. Other days it flared with an intensity that overwhelmed everyone in a 20-foot radius. The doctors could not predict or control it. That was how the hospital had become his home. Not officially, not permanently, but in the way that matters. He knew which vending machine on the 3rd floor still had the good apple juice. He knew that Nurse Adago on the night shift would sneak him an extra blanket if he asked nicely. He knew that the courtyard garden was prettiest at dawn, when the light hit the Japanese maple and turned it into fire, and that the chapel on the 1st floor was always empty at 2 in the morning, which was when he went there to sit in silence and feel sorry for himself in peace. He had a life outside these walls, technically. A studio apartment 6 blocks away that he returned to during his good stretches, sometimes for weeks at a time. A freelance illustration career he maintained through a tablet and a stylus and clients who did not know their artist worked from a hospital bed half the year. A best friend named June who visited every Thursday with homemade soup and aggressive optimism. But the hospital was home. And Soren had made a kind of peace with that. What he had not made peace with was the alpha in room 417. It started with the scent. That impossible winter pine and wood smoke that crept under his door every evening around 6:30 and made his monitors go haywire. The nurses noticed. Of course they noticed. His heart rate spiked, his blood pressure shifted, his pheromone output surged in a way that had not happened in years. "Are you in pain?" Nurse Adago asked on the 3rd evening, frowning at his readings. "No." "Your vitals say otherwise." "My vitals are liars." She gave him a look but let it go. Soren did not tell her that every evening when that scent rolled through, his body woke up in ways he had forgotten it could. His skin prickled, his chest warmed. Something ancient and primal stirred in the part of him that his disease had been slowly killing. And for 20 or 30 minutes he felt like an omega again, instead of a patient. He did not tell her because he knew what it meant, and knowing made it worse. Biological compatibility. The kind that textbooks wrote about and romantics built fairy tales around. Fated, some people called it, though Soren had always thought that word was a little dramatic for what was essentially chemistry. But whatever it was, his body recognized the alpha next door with a certainty that terrified him, because Soren Park was not in a position to be recognized by anyone. He was a 29-year-old omega with a shelf life that his doctors discussed in hushed voices when they thought he could not hear. Falling for someone, letting someone fall for him, that was not brave or beautiful. It was cruel. So he kept his door closed, he watched from his window, and he pretended that the winter pine scent did not make him feel more alive than he had felt in years. The first time they actually met was an accident. It was the 2nd week of November, and Coyle had arrived early for his morning visit. His mother had a good night, the nurses said, which in oncology language meant she had slept without screaming and her pain medication was holding. He stopped at the small kitchenette near the nurses' station to make himself coffee. A routine he had developed because hospital cafeteria. Coffee tasted like regret, and he refused to leave the floor once he arrived. The kitchenette was a narrow room with a counter, a microwave, a coffee maker that had seen better decades, and barely enough space for 2 people to stand without touching. Cale was reaching for the coffee filters on the top shelf when someone appeared in the doorway behind him. "Oh." The voice was soft, slightly raspy, surprised. Cale turned. The scent hit him like a wall. Honey and white ginger, impossibly close, impossibly real, and he gripped the counter behind him because his knees actually went weak, which was something he had thought only happened in bad romance novels. The omega standing in the doorway was not what Cale expected, though he could not have said what he had expected. Soren Park was tall for an omega, almost 5'10", but thin in the way of long illness, all sharp angles and translucent skin. He wore hospital-issue pajama pants and an oversized gray sweater that slipped off one shoulder, revealing the ridge of a collarbone and the edge of a medical port taped to his chest. His hair was black and too long, falling into eyes that were dark and enormous in a face that was more striking than handsome. High cheekbones, a jaw that could cut paper, a mouth that looked like it had been designed specifically to make someone want to say something foolish. He was holding an empty mug with a cartoon cat on it. He was also clearly just as affected as Cale because his pupils had blown wide and a flush was creeping up his neck, and his scent, that devastating honey-ginger warmth, had spiked so sharply that the air between them practically shimmered. They stared at each other. 3 seconds. 5. 7. An entire geological era passed in that kitchenette. "I can come back," Soren said finally, his voice carefully controlled in a way that told Coyle he was working very hard to maintain composure. "No, stay. I was just making coffee. There is enough for 2. The words came out before Cale could filter them, which was alarming because Kyle Mitsuhashi was a man who filtered everything. He had built a billion-dollar company on the ability to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. And here he was, offering coffee to a stranger like some overeager college student at a mixer. Soren hesitated. Kyle could see the calculation happening behind those dark eyes. The weighing of risk and reward, the internal debate of a person who had learned to be careful with proximity. "Just coffee," Kyle added quietly. He was not sure why he said it. Some instinct told him this Omega needed the reassurance. Soren stepped into the kitchenette. The space shrank immediately. They were close enough that Cole could count the faint freckles across the bridge of Soren's nose, could see the slight tremor in his hands as he set the cat mug on the counter. "I am Kyle," he said, because introductions seemed like safe ground. "I know. Your mother is in 417. I am in 418. "I know," Kyle said, and then, because honesty seemed to be the only option available to him, "I have been aware of you for 2 weeks. Soren looked up sharply. His expression was difficult to read, a compound of alarm and something hungrier underneath. "Aware. Your scent." Kyle said it plainly, the way he delivered difficult truths in boardrooms. No softening, no hedging. "I catch it every evening when I visit. And I am standing here right now trying very hard to be a reasonable person about it. But I want to be honest with you because something tells me you have had enough people be dishonest." The silence that followed was loaded. Soren's flush deepened, spreading from his neck to his cheeks, and his scent pulsed, a warm wave that Coyle felt in his molars. "That is a lot of honesty for a first conversation," Soren said. "I have been told I lack subtlety." "You really do." But Soren's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. He wrapped both hands around his empty mug like he needed something to hold on to. "Soren. My name is Soren Park." "Soren." Kyle said it carefully, tasting the syllables the way Soren's scent tasted on his tongue. Bright and warm and undercut with something that should not be there, a metallic thread, the ghost of medication and illness. "What are you in for?" "That is a prison question." "This place has the same lighting." This time Soren did smile. Brief, reluctant, but genuine, and it rearranged his entire face from striking to beautiful in a way that made Cale's breath catch. "Autoimmune," Soren said. "My body is very committed to destroying itself. It has been at it for 8 years, and honestly, the dedication is impressive." The levity was a shield. Coyle recognized it because he used the same defense mechanism. Humor as armor, deflection dressed as wit. "I am sorry," Kyle said, and meant it. "And your mother?" Soren asked, his voice gentler now. "Pancreatic. Stage 4. "I am sorry. Thank you." They stood there, 2 people drowning in separate oceans, connected by a scent that neither of them had asked for, and a kitchenette that smelled like bad coffee and biological destiny. Kyle made the coffee. They drank it in, near silence, standing 3 feet apart in the narrow room, and neither of them commented on the fact that Soren's heart rate monitor, still clipped to his finger, was beeping fast. Then Coyle went to sit with his mother, and Soren went back to his room, and they did not see each other again until the following day. Except, that was not entirely true, because Coyle's evening visits to his mother now included a new awareness. He felt Soren through the wall. Not literally, not psychically, but in the way you feel weather changing. The barometric shift of another person's proximity when every molecule in your body has been calibrated to notice them. He heard Soren's television through the wall sometimes, always playing nature documentaries at low volume. He heard the occasional cough that lasted too long. He heard once at 11 at night when Kyle had fallen asleep in the chair beside his mother, the sound of someone crying very quietly in the next room. He had pressed his hand flat against the wall and closed his eyes and hated himself for not knowing what to do. The coffee conversations deepened in the way that conversations do when two people are running out of time and know it. Soren told Kale about art school, about the watercolor series he had been working on before his first hospitalization, landscapes of places he had never visited, painted from photographs and imagination. "I have a folder on my laptop," Soren said one morning, cupping his coffee with both hands the way he always did, like he was trying to absorb its warmth. 67 places I want to see before I die. I have seen 4 of them. Which 4? The Japanese garden in Portland, the cliffs at Big Sur, the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., and a diner in Tucson that supposedly has the best pie in America. Was it? The best pie? It was extraordinary. I cried in the parking lot afterward, and the waitress thought I was having a breakdown, which, to be fair, I sort of was, but the pie was also genuinely perfect. Kyle told Soren about his mother. About growing up in a household where the Omega parent was the undisputed authority and his alpha father deferred to her on every major decision, which had shaped Coyle's understanding of designation in ways that he was only now beginning to appreciate. He told Soren about the pressure of inheriting a company at 32 when his father died suddenly, about the decade of 16-hour days and strategic ruthlessness that had built Mitsuhashi Industries into a global force while dismantling every personal relationship Kyle had attempted. I was engaged once, Kyle admitted. It was the 3rd week of their morning routine, and Soren was having a good day, color in his cheeks, steadiness in his hands. To another alpha, actually. A woman named Caroline. We made sense on paper. Complementary temperaments, aligned goals, mutual respect. But there was no pull, no gravity. We were 2 magnets with the same charge, always sliding past each other. What happened? She left me for an Omega baker from Vermont. They have 3 children now, and a sourdough starter named Gerald. She sends me Christmas cards. They look disgustingly happy. Soren laughed, and the sound did something to Kale's chest that he filed away under dangerous and examined later in the privacy of his car, where he sat for 10 minutes before driving to the office, pressing his fingers to his sternum and wondering when this person had become essential. Because that was the truth he could no longer avoid. Soren Park, this impossibly stubborn, wickedly funny, achingly beautiful Omega who was being slowly taken apart by his own biology, had become essential. The scent was part of it, yes. That honey-ginger warmth that made Kale's alpha instincts purr with recognition every time he stepped onto the 4th floor. But it was also the way Soren argued with his doctors, politely but immovably, about treatment timelines. The way he left little watercolor cards for the nurses on their birthdays, each one personalized with details he had remembered from their conversations. The way he refused to let anyone carry anything for him, even when his hands shook so badly he dropped things twice on the way to the kitchenette. The way he looked at Kyle sometimes when he thought Kyle was not watching, with an expression so naked with wanting that it made Kyle's throat close, and the way he always looked away before Kyle could meet his eyes, because Soren was keeping distance. Kyle could feel it, a deliberate gap maintained between them, a line that Soren refused to cross no matter how much the scent between them begged for closure. And Kyle, who had bulldozed through every obstacle in his professional life with the subtlety of a freight train, found himself respecting that boundary with a patience he did not know he possessed. Everything changed on a Thursday in December. Kyle arrived for his morning visit and found the kitchenette empty. Soren's cat mug was not on the rack. Kyle made coffee anyway, poured 2 cups and waited. 10 minutes. 15. 20. He carried Soren's mug to room 418 and found the door closed. Through the small window he could see medical staff moving quickly around the bed, could hear the urgent beeping of alarms, could see Soren's face, pale as chalk, eyes closed, an oxygen mask strapped over his nose and mouth. Kyle stood in the hallway holding a cup of coffee with 2 sugars and felt the ground open under his feet. A nurse finally emerged and Kyle caught her arm. Not roughly, but with enough urgency that she stopped. What happened? Are you family? No. Then I cannot disclose patient information. His name is Soren Park. He is 29 years old. He drinks his coffee with 2 sugars, and his favorite color is the specific shade of blue that the sky turns 10 minutes before sunset. He is terrified of pigeons because one stole his sandwich in Central Park when he was 12, and he says it looked him directly in the eyes while it did it. He is the most remarkable person I have ever met, and I need to know if he is all right. The nurse looked at him for a long time. Something in her expression softened. He had a flare. A severe one. His immune system attacked his respiratory function overnight. He is stable now, but he is not conscious. When? A few hours from now, maybe. His body needs to recover. Can I sit with him? You are not family. I know. Another long look. Then the nurse glanced down the hallway, checked that no one was watching, and stepped aside. 15 minutes. If anyone asks, you got lost looking for the restroom. Kyle sat beside Soren's bed for 15 minutes that felt like 15 seconds. The monitoring equipment beeped and hummed. The oxygen mask fogged and cleared with each shallow breath. Soren's hand lay on the blanket, pale and thin, the medical ID bracelet loose around his wrist. Kyle reached out and covered that hand with his own. The contact sent a jolt through him, electric and warm, and Soren's monitors flickered. His heart rate, which had been sluggish and irregular, steadied. His oxygen levels climbed 2 points. His scent, nearly absent during the crisis, flickered back to life. Just a whisper, faint as candlelight in a storm. But there. Honey. Ginger. Home. Kyle pressed Soren's knuckles to his lips and breathed him in, and something that had been locked inside his chest for 20 years broke open with a sound only he could hear. When the nurse came to usher him out, his eyes were dry, but his hand shook as he set down the coffee cup on Soren's nightstand, right next to the cat mug that had been washed and placed there by someone who knew it belonged. Soren woke at 4 in the afternoon, disoriented and aching, his lungs burning with the particular fire of a body that had tried to suffocate itself. The first thing he saw was the coffee cup. Still full, long cold, sitting beside his cat mug on the nightstand. 2 sugars. He knew who had left it the way he knew his own heartbeat. That made everything worse. Soren pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and tried very hard not to think about the way his body had responded to a touch he should not have felt. His monitors had recorded everything, the stabilization of his heart rate, the improvement in his oxygen, the resurgence of his scent. His body had recognized its mate even while unconscious, had reached toward that winter pine presence like a plant turning toward light. Dr. Ando would see the data. Dr. Ando would have questions. And Soren would have to say out loud the thing he had been pretending was not true, that his dying body had decided, with spectacularly terrible timing, to imprint on the alpha in the next room. His phone buzzed, a text from June, his best friend. Coming Thursday as usual. Soup is butternut squash this week. Rate your day 1 to 10. Soren typed back, 4, almost died, the usual. What? Kidding. Flare up, but I am fine. See you Thursday. He set the phone down and looked at the cold coffee again. Then he picked it up, brought it to his lips, and drank it anyway. It was terrible. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Coyle came back that evening for his mother's visit, and this time Soren's door was open. They looked at each other across the hallway, Cale pausing mid-stride, Soren sitting upright in bed with a sketchbook in his lap and a colored pencil behind his ear. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a thin cannula that hooked over his ears. His color was better. His eyes were clear. He looked like someone who had stared death down that morning and had decided to be annoyed about it rather than afraid. You left me cold coffee, Soren said. You scared me half to death, Kyle replied. Something passed between them. Not words, not touch, but something that lived in the frequency between winter pine and honey ginger, a conversation their biology was having without permission. I am fine, Soren said. You were not fine 12 hours ago. 12 hours ago is a long time in this ward. I have been not fine and then fine again more times than I can count. It is my signature move. Kyle stepped into the room. Soren's scent surrounded him immediately, intimate and warm, and he had to lock his jaw to keep his expression neutral. Your doctors. What did they say? The things they always say. Rest, monitoring, adjusted medication. My body threw a tantrum and now it is tired. I have been through worse. That does not make me feel better. It was not designed to make you feel better. Soren set down his sketchbook and looked at Coyle with an expression that was painfully direct. Cale, what happened this morning with the coffee, with you sitting here? I know you were here, the nurses told me. We need to talk about what this is. I know what this is. Then you know it is a terrible idea. Probably, not probably, definitively. I am a 29-year-old Omega whose body is in active rebellion against its own existence. My longest stretch out of this hospital in the past 2 years was 43 days. I take 11 medications. I cannot regulate my own scent. I have not had a heat in 4 years, and my bonding receptors are so damaged that my doctors are not even sure they still function. I am not a good investment, Cale. The business metaphor hit its mark. Cale flinched, just barely, and Soren saw it. I did not come here looking for an investment, Cale said quietly. I came here because my mother is dying. And then I met you. And something happened that I cannot explain and do not want to undo. And I understand that the timing is catastrophic and the circumstances are impossible. But I am standing here anyway. Soren's hands trembled on the sketchbook. His scent flared, warm and bright, then receded like a tide that could not decide whether to come in or go out. Your mother needs you right now, Soren said, and his voice cracked on the word mother. That is where your attention should be. Not on the dying Omega next door who cannot even make it through the night without setting off every alarm on the floor. You are not just the dying Omega next door. That is exactly what I am. No, you are the person who paints 67 places he has never seen, who leaves birthday cards for nurses, who drinks cold coffee because someone cared enough to bring it. And yes, you are sick. And yes, my mother is dying, and we are both drowning in this place. But I would rather drown next to you than alone, if you will let me. The monitors beeped, the fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a call button chimed. Soren looked at Kyle Mitsuhashi, this ridiculous, earnest, terrifyingly sincere alpha who stood in his hospital room smelling like everything Soren had ever wanted and never allowed himself to have, and he said the most honest thing he had said in years. I am afraid. So am I. No, you do not understand. I am afraid because I already care about you, and caring about people when you are dying is the cruelest thing you can do to them. I have watched it happen. I watched my mother grieve for 6 years before my father finally died, and it destroyed her. I swore I would never do that to someone. That is not your decision to make for me. It should be. But it is not. Kull crossed the room and sat in the visitor's chair beside Soren's bed, close enough that their scents tangled in the air between them, winter pine wrapping around honey ginger like a shield. I am going to visit my mother now, Kull said. And tomorrow morning at 7:15, I am going to be in the kitchenette with coffee that is not terrible, and you can come or not come, but I will be there either way. He stood, and as he passed the bed, his hand brushed Soren's where it rested on the blanket. The contact lasted less than a second. Soren's entire body lit up like a circuit completing, warmth flooding from the point of contact through his chest, his lungs, his damaged pheromone glands, and for one blazing moment his scent bloomed with a richness it had not carried in years. Kale paused, his nostrils flared, his eyes darkened, and Soren saw the exact moment the alpha in him recognized what had just happened. 7:15, Kyle repeated, his voice rougher now, and he left. Wow, you have made it this far. If you are enjoying the story, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. I read every single one. All right, let us get back to the story. Soren showed up at 7:12 the next morning. He told himself it was because the coffee was good. He told himself it was because his room was boring, and the kitchenette had a window that faced east, and the morning light was paintable. He told himself a lot of things. None of them were true. The truth was that he had spent all night staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Coyle's hand had brushed his, the way his body had responded with a violence that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure. For years, his disease had been stripping him of everything that made him Omega. His heats, his scent regulation, his bonding capability, all of it degrading in slow motion. He had grieved each loss privately, adding it to the growing list of things his illness had stolen. But last night, when Kyle touched him, something woke up. Something the disease had not killed yet. Something that reached toward that winter pine scent with a desperation that Soren felt in his marrow. And he knew, with the clarity of someone who has studied their own body's failures with academic precision, that this was dangerous. Not because of the attraction, but because of what it was doing to his biology. His doctors had warned him years ago that a faded bond response, if it ever occurred, could accelerate his decline. The autoimmune system would interpret the bond hormones as another threat. His body would fight the very thing that was trying to save it. Falling in love could kill him faster. He showed up at 7:12 anyway. You are early, Kale said from the counter, where he was already arranging coffee supplies with the focused precision of a man who approached everything like a strategic operation. You are earlier. I wanted to make sure the coffee was perfect. Is this how you run your company? Obsessing over details that no one else would notice? It is exactly how I run my company. It is also how I lost my first marriage engagement and alienated most of my college friends, so the results are mixed. Soren laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It was not the careful, measured laugh he usually deployed, the one that kept people at a comfortable distance. It was real, sudden, slightly too loud for a hospital kitchenette at dawn, and it made Coyle turn and look at him with an expression that Soren would later paint from memory and title, The Morning He Decided. They drank their coffee. They talked about nothing important, Soren's opinion on hospital food rankings, Cole's ongoing war with his company's head of marketing, who kept trying to make their brand more relatable through what Cole described as aggressively mediocre social media content. But underneath the nothing, there was everything. Every look lasted a beat too long. Every accidental brush of fingers on the coffee maker sent electricity through the air. Soren's scent wrapped around Kale like a blanket, and Kale's winter pine anchored Soren in a way that made his breathing easier, his pain duller, his world slightly less sharp-edged. It was the beginning. Both of them knew it. Neither of them said it. But from that morning forward, 7:15 in the kitchenette became the axis around which both their days turned, and the staff of the fourth floor began setting an unofficial countdown, trading knowing looks when the Alpha and the Omega disappeared into that narrow room each morning and emerged 30 minutes later with expressions that said everything their words did not. December turned to January, and the world outside the hospital moved on without them. Kale restructured his entire schedule around the fourth floor. Mornings with Soren, afternoons at the office, where he ran a multinational corporation with one eye on his phone, waiting for updates from the nursing staff he had quietly befriended. Evenings with his mother, reading to her, holding her hand while she slept, and then standing in the hallway between rooms 417 and 418, caught between the two people he was losing in different ways. His mother was fading. The cancer had spread to her liver, and the doctors had started using phrases like comfort measures and quality of remaining time that made Kale want to put his fist through a wall. She slept more now, talked less. But when she was awake, she was sharp as a blade, and she had noticed things. "You smell different," Kimiko said one evening, her eyes too knowing for someone on that much morphine. "Do I?" "Omega. Honey and something warm. It is lovely." She paused. "Who is he?" Kale set down his book. There was no point lying to a woman who could read him like large print. "His name is Soren. He is in the next room." "Is it serious?" "It is complicated." "That is not what I asked." Kale looked at his mother, at the woman who had spent her life teaching him that strength and tenderness were the same thing, and he told her the truth. "He is sick, very sick, autoimmune, and I know, that what I feel for him is the kind of thing that does not have a halfway setting." Kimiko was quiet for a long time. The monitors counted the seconds between them. "Bring him to me," she said finally. "I would like to meet the person who makes my son smell like springtime." "I do not smell like springtime." "You smell like a man who has finally found something worth losing sleep over, which frankly is an improvement over smelling like spreadsheets and loneliness." Kyle brought Soren to meet his mother the next afternoon. It was one of Soren's good days, and he had insisted on walking without his IV pole, which meant he was slightly unsteady and stubbornly pretending not to be. Kyle hovered without touching, a satellite held in orbit by gravity and restraint. Kimiko took one look at Soren Park and smiled with a radiance that erased 10 years of illness from her face. "You are the artist," she said. "And you are the woman who raised the man who brings me coffee with exactly 2 sugars every morning," Soren replied. "Yes, well, he learned persistence from me. Although I should warn you, in our family, persistence looks a lot like stubbornness, and stubbornness looks a lot like refusing to leave someone alone, even when they very clearly want to be left alone." "I have noticed." "Good. Then you are paying attention." They talked for an hour. Soren showed Kimiko his sketchbook, and she pointed out her favorites with the critical eye of a woman who had spent decades chairing art museum fundraisers. She asked him about his illness with the same directness her son used, and Soren answered honestly, which Kale could tell was unusual for him. Most people got the deflection and humor routine. Kimiko got the truth. When Soren finally left, exhausted but glowing, Kimiko turned to her son with wet eyes. "Oh, Kyle. I know. He is extraordinary. I know. He is also dying." The word hung in the sterile air like a held breath. "I know that too," Kyle said, and his voice did not break, but it wanted to. Kimiko reached for his hand. Her grip was barely there, the ghost of the strength she used to have. "Do not waste time being afraid. I have spent 63 years on this earth, and the only regret I have is the time I spent protecting myself from things that turned out to be worth every wound. He does not want to hurt me. Of course he does not. He loves you too much for that. He has not said that. He does not need to. I am an omega, Kale. I can read scent the way you read balance sheets. That boy is so in love with you, his body is fighting itself just to stay alive long enough to see you one more time. The weeks that followed were the best and worst of Kyle's life simultaneously. He was falling in love with Soren Park, with the helpless, annihilating certainty of someone who has found the one thing they cannot live without and knows it has an expiration date. And Soren was letting him. Not easily, not without resistance, but piece by piece, day by day, the walls Soren had built to protect Kale from himself were coming down, and what was behind them was so luminous it hurt to look at directly. They graduated from the kitchenette to Soren's room, where Kale would sit in the visitor's chair and work on his laptop while Soren painted beside him in bed. They did not need to talk constantly. The silence between them had become a living thing, warm and populated, filled with the sound of keystrokes and brush on paper and two sets of breathing that had unconsciously synchronized. On Soren's good days, they walked the hospital corridors together. Kale learned that Soren walked the way he did everything, with determination and a slight recklessness that made the nurses nervous. He learned that Soren talked to the long-term patients on other floors, knew their names and their stories, left illustrations tucked into their chart holders when they were sleeping. "You are collecting people," Kyle observed one afternoon, after Soren had spent 20 minutes with an elderly beta man in the cardiac ward who showed them photos of his grandchildren with the pride of someone displaying the Mona Lisa. "I am appreciating people. There is a difference." "What is the difference?" "Collecting implies ownership. Appreciating implies attention. I pay attention to people because most of them are not paid attention to enough, especially in places like this." He glanced at Kale sideways. "You pay attention too. You just do it from behind a desk. I pay attention to quarterly reports and market analysis. And to your mother. And to the nurses here, all of whom you know by name, even though you pretend you do not. And to me." Kale did not respond. Some truths are too large for words. On Soren's bad days, Kyle learned a different vocabulary. He learned what flair meant when it was not an abstract medical term, but a reality unfolding in front of him. He learned the sound of Soren's breathing when his lungs were compromised, a shallow rasp that made Kale's alpha instincts scream to do something, fix something, protect something, and there was nothing to fight. He learned to sit still while machines did work that love could not do, and he learned that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stay in the room. The first time Soren let Kyle touch him intentionally, it was a Tuesday in late January. Soren was coming off a bad stretch, 3 days of elevated inflammation that had left him wrung out and translucent. Kale was reading aloud from a novel Soren liked, something about a botanist who discovered a flower that could predict the future, and Soren's hand found his on the bed between them, not dramatically, not with declaration, just a quiet relocation of fingers slipping between Kyle's the way a key slides into a lock, and both of them went completely still. Soren's monitors registered the change immediately. His heart rate, which had been fluttering with post-flare irregularity, settled into a steady, strong rhythm. His oxygen climbed, his blood pressure normalized. The scent in the room deepened, honey ginger blooming so richly that the winter pine seemed to lean into it, the two fragrances weaving together in a pattern that felt ancient and inevitable. Neither of them let go for the rest of the afternoon. "This is going to destroy you," Soren whispered that evening when Kale was gathering his things to leave. "No. Losing you without ever having had you would destroy me. This, whatever this is, whatever it costs, this is the opposite of destruction." Soren looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, and for the first time, there were no walls behind them. No shields, no humor, no calculated distance. Just a man who was very tired of fighting what his heart already knew. My doctor says that a bonding response could accelerate my decline, Soren said. She says my immune system would interpret bond hormones as a threat. That falling in love is literally killing me. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Kyle felt each one. Is that what is happening? He asked carefully. Are you falling in love? Kale. Soren's voice broke on his name. I have been in love with you since the morning you told me you had been aware of me for 2 weeks. I am just terrified of what it is going to do to you when I am gone. Kale crossed the room in 2 strides. He took Soren's face in both hands, cradling his jaw with a gentleness that belied the storm raging behind his ribs. Soren's skin was warm under his palms, and the omega trembled, his breath catching, his scent exploding with a sweetness that was almost unbearable. Then let it do whatever it is going to do, Kale said, but do not make me live without this. Not when we are right here. He pressed his forehead to Soren's. Their breath mingled. The monitors sang. And in a hospital room that smelled like honey and winter, 2 people who had been drowning alone decided to drown together instead. Soren tilted his chin up, closing the last inch of distance, and pressed his lips to Kyle's. The kiss was soft, almost unbearably soft, the kind of kiss that contains an entire future neither of them believed they would have. Kyle's hands trembled on Soren's face. Soren's fingers curled into the front of Kyle's shirt, pulling him closer. For one suspended moment, the illness, the machines, the prognosis, all of it faded, and there was nothing but this. 2 people. 1 kiss. And the aching, defiant insistence that love does not need to last forever to matter. February arrived with ice on the windows and a phone call at 3 in the morning. Kale was at home, the first time he had slept in his own bed in weeks. His phone lit up with the hospital's number, and his blood went cold before he even answered. Mr. Mitsuhashi, this is Nurse Adego. I am calling about your mother. They gave him 45 minutes. That was what they said when he arrived, breathless and shaking, his suit jacket thrown on over pajama pants because he had not bothered to dress properly. 45 minutes to an hour, maybe less. Kimiko was conscious. Barely. The morphine had been increased to the point where reality was more suggestion than fact, but when Kale took her hand, she squeezed. I am here, he said. I know, she whispered. Her eyes moved around the room, unfocused, then found him with sudden clarity. Where is the boy? Soren? Bring him. Please, I want to see him one more time. Kyle found Soren already awake. Later, he would learn that Soren had woken the moment Kimiko's monitors began their final descent, roused by some instinct that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with the fact that grief has its own frequency, and people who love each other hear it through walls. Soren was sitting on the edge of his bed, his feet on the floor, his IV pole beside him, already reaching for his slippers. I know, Soren said before Kyle could speak. I felt it. They went together. Kyle pushed Soren's IV pole with one hand and held Soren's arm with the other, and they walked the 12 steps from 418 to 417. And those 12 steps were the longest journey of Kyle's life. Kimiko smiled when she saw them. There you are, she said, as if she had been waiting for a bus and it had finally arrived. Look at you both. She looked at them with eyes that were already traveling somewhere else, and her smile held a warmth that filled the room. Soren, take care of him for me. I will. Soren's voice was steady in a way that Kyle's couldn't be. He reached across the bed and took Kimiko's other hand, and the 3 of them formed a triangle of held hands in the blue light of the monitors. And Kale. Her voice was fading now. Let him. Let him what? Let him take care of you. You are so used to being strong for everyone else that you have forgotten how to let someone be strong for you. This beautiful boy knows how. Let him. I will, I promise. Good. Her eyes closed. Her grip loosened. I am very tired. Then rest. I am right here. I know you are. You have always been right here. Kimiko Mitsuhashi died at 4:27 in the morning, with her son holding one hand and the Omega he loved holding the other, and the scent in the room in those final moments was not antiseptic or medication or decay. It was persimmons. Warm, ripe persimmons. The scent Kimiko had carried all her life, flaring one last time like a candle before it goes out. Kale did not move for a long time after the monitors flatlined. Soren pressed his forehead to their joined hands and cried silently. The nurses came and went. Forms were signed. The body was handled with the efficient tenderness that hospitals reserve for the newly dead. And through all of it, Kale sat in the chair beside the empty bed, hollowed out, holding the hand of someone who was still alive, and knowing that he should be grateful for that, but unable to feel anything at all. The grief hit Kale like a delayed explosion. The first week, he functioned. Funeral arrangements, legal proceedings, company communications, all the mechanical tasks of loss that keep you moving when your body wants to stop. His assistant Rhea handled most of it with ruthless competence, clearing his schedule and intercepting calls and once, memorably, physically blocking a board member who tried to corner Kyle about a merger 3 days after his mother's death. "Try again in a month," Rhea had said, "or I will find out where you park." But by the second week, the machinery broke down. Kale stopped going to the hospital. He stopped answering his phone. He sat in his penthouse apartment in the dark, surrounded by his mother's things that he had been meaning to sort and could not bear to touch, and he felt the distance between himself and Soren grow with every hour he did not walk through those hospital doors. He told himself he was grieving. He told himself he needed space. But the truth was uglier than that. The truth was that watching his mother die had cracked something in him that he could not repair, and the thought of walking back into that hospital, back onto that floor, back into a world where the person he loved most was also dying, made him want to crawl out of his own skin. Soren did not call. Soren did not text. Soren waited with the patience of someone who understood grief intimately and knew that chasing a wounded person only makes them run faster. But on the 14th day, a package arrived at Kale's door. Inside was a watercolor painting. It was the view from Soren's hospital window, the courtyard garden in winter, bare branches and frost, and a single figure standing beside a black sedan. The figure was small, rendered with a few confident brushstrokes, but Kale recognized himself immediately, recognized the grief in those painted shoulders, the way Soren had captured the specific posture of a man breaking down in a parking lot and refusing to let anyone see it. On the back of the painting, in Soren's careful handwriting, were 7 words. "I am still here. Come when ready." Kyle sat on his kitchen floor and held the painting and wept for the first time since his mother died. He went back. Of course he went back. He went back because Soren was still there, and because his mother's last words had been about letting someone take care of him, and because 14 days without that honey ginger scent had felt like trying to breathe with one lung. But when he walked into room 418, what he found stopped him in the doorway. Soren looked different, worse, noticeably, undeniably worse. The 2 weeks of Kyle's absence had been unkind. Soren was thinner, his cheekbones sharper, shadows under his eyes like bruises. His scent was faint, barely there, a ghost of what it had been. The medical port on his chest had been replaced with something larger, more invasive. His hands, which had held brushes and coffee mugs and Coyle's fingers with such steady grace, trembled against the blanket. "You look terrible," Soren said from the bed, because of course he did. "You look worse," Kyle replied, because honesty was their language. "I have an excuse. What is yours?" "Grief." "Ah, yes, that will do it." Soren's eyes moved over Kyle's face with an attention that was almost painful in its thoroughness. Did you eat? Rhea made sure of it. Rhea is a good woman. You should give her a raise. I gave her 3. Then she deserves a 4th. Kyle crossed the room, sat in his chair, and picked up Soren's hand. The contact was different this time. Soren's skin was cooler than before, his pulse thready under Kyle's thumb. The scent response that had always sparked between them was muted, a pilot light instead of a flame. What happened? Kyle asked. Soren did not deflect, did not joke, did not redirect. The disease progressed while you were gone. My respiratory function dropped another 12%. My pheromone glands are not producing at baseline levels anymore, and my doctor, who is very kind and very honest, told me last week that we are running out of treatment options. The words arrived like bullets, each one precise and devastating. What does that mean? It means we are moving from fighting to managing, from curing to comfortable. Kale's grip tightened on Soren's hand. His scent surged, winter pine flooding the room in a protective wave that made the monitors flutter, and Soren closed his eyes, breathing it in. How long? Kyle. How long, Soren? Months, maybe 6, maybe 12. They cannot be precise because my disease has never followed a predictable pattern. I have always been a medical anomaly. Apparently, even my dying has to be dramatic. The humor cracked at the edges. Soren opened his eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. I am sorry. I am sorry you came back to this. Do not apologize for existing. I am not apologizing for existing. I am apologizing because I love you and I am going to leave you, and there is nothing either of us can do about it, and I hate this so much that sometimes I cannot breathe, and I do not know if that is the disease or the unfairness of it. Kyle brought Soren's hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to each knuckle, one at a time. Soren's scent flickered, honey ginger struggling to surface through the chemical overlay of medication and decline, and Kale breathed it in like a prayer. Then we make it count, Kale said, whatever time there is. We make every minute of it mean something. Kale, that is a lovely sentiment, but I am literally in a hospital bed. So we bring the world to you. And he did. Kale Mitsuhashi, who had built an empire on logistics and execution, turned the full force of his operational genius toward a single objective, giving Soren Park every experience he had ever wanted within the constraints of a body that could not leave the hospital for more than a few hours at a time. He started with the list. The 67 places Soren wanted to see. He could not take Soren to all of them, but he could and did commission artists and photographers from every location to create original works specifically for Soren. A watercolor of the northern lights from an Icelandic painter, a charcoal sketch of the Amalfi Coast from a street artist in Positano, a handmade book of pressed wildflowers from the meadows of the Swiss Alps, each one labeled in careful calligraphy. They arrived in a steady stream, one a day, and Soren opened each one with the breathless wonder of a child at Christmas, and Kyle watched from his chair and memorized the specific architecture of joy on Soren's face. He brought food. Not hospital food, but meals from every restaurant Soren had ever mentioned wanting to try, smuggled in heated bags past the nurse's station with the cooperation of a Daego, who had long since stopped pretending she was not rooting for them. He brought music, setting up a small speaker that played the playlists Soren had made for painting, soft instrumentals and jazz, and the occasional pop song that Soren would mouth along to with his eyes closed. He brought himself. Every morning at 7:15. Every evening after work. Every moment he could steal from a life that was suddenly, urgently rearranging itself around the knowledge that time was not infinite. And Soren let him. Not passively, not as a patient accepting care, but as a partner meeting Kale halfway with the same fierce intentionality. On his good days, Soren painted. He painted Kale obsessively, capturing him in watercolors that grew more beautiful as Soren's hands grew less steady. Kale reading. Kale sleeping in the visitor's chair with his mouth open and his tie loosened. Kyle on the phone in the hallway, one hand in his hair, his expression fierce and focused. Kyle's hands around a coffee mug. Kyle's profile against the window light. Each painting was an act of love so transparent it was almost impossible to look at without flinching. On his bad days, Soren held Kale's hand, and they watched nature documentaries in silence, and Soren would occasionally narrate the animals' inner monologues in absurd voices until Kale laughed, which was the real point. "That penguin is having an existential crisis," Soren would say in a deep, mournful tone. "He is questioning his life choices. He wants to move to Argentina and start a bed and breakfast, but his wife will never agree." "You are projecting." "All art is projection, Kale. I thought you went to business school." They did not talk about the future. They did not make plans. They lived in a present tense that was both beautiful and suffocating, and the hospital staff watched them with the particular tenderness reserved for love stories that everyone knows will not end well. Spring came early that year, which felt like a cruel joke. The courtyard garden below Soren's window erupted in cherry blossoms, and Kale arranged for Soren to be taken downstairs in a wheelchair to see them. It was the first time Soren had been outside in 7 weeks, and the sun on his face made him look so alive that Kale had to turn away for a moment to collect himself. "Stop that," Soren said from the wheelchair. "Stop what?" "Grieving me while I am still here. I can feel you doing it. Your scent goes all wrong." "How does it go wrong?" "It gets heavy, saturated, like you are trying to fill a room with yourself so there is no space for the absence that is coming. It is a very alpha thing to do, and it is not helpful." Kale knelt beside the wheelchair in the garden, cherry blossoms falling around them like pink snow, and looked up at Soren with an honesty that stripped him bare. "I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to love someone and lose them at the same time." "Nobody does. That is not a skill you develop in advance. It is something you survive in real time." "And if I cannot?" "You can. You are the most stubborn person I have ever met, and I say that as someone who has been arguing with his own immune system for 8 years. Soren. Kyle." They looked at each other in the spring sunlight, and the cherry blossoms fell, and somewhere nearby a robin was singing with the frantic optimism of a bird that does not know the world is ending. "I want to bond with you," Kyle said. The words fell out of him like something that had been straining against a locked door finally breaking through. "I know what your doctor said. I know the risks. I know what it could do to your body, but I need you to know that if you want it, if there is any part of you that wants to carry my mark and let me carry yours, I will accept whatever comes after." Soren's eyes filled. His scent surged, honey and ginger blooming so richly that Kale could taste it, could feel it settle into his lungs and his bones, and every hollow place that grief had carved inside him. "It would shorten my time," Soren whispered. "I know. It could take months off what I have left. I know that too. And you still want it. I want you. For however long that is. On whatever terms your body can manage." Soren reached out and touched Kale's face. His fingers were cold, his touch feather-light, but Kale felt it like a brand. "Then yes," Soren said. "God help us both. But yes." They bonded on a Tuesday night in April in room 418 of St. Eliot's Medical Center, with the cherry blossoms visible through the window and Nurse Diego stationed outside the door to ensure they were not interrupted. It was not the bonding either of them had imagined. There was no heat, no rut, no overwhelming biological imperative driving them together. Soren's body could not produce those responses anymore. Instead, there was something quieter and, in its way, more powerful. Coyle sat on the edge of Soren's bed, their hands intertwined, their foreheads touching. Their scents filled the room. Winter pine and honey ginger weaving together so tightly that the boundary between them dissolved. Kyle could not tell where he ended, and Soren began. "Are you sure?" Kyle asked one last time. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. And I have been sure of very few things, so the short list makes this more impressive." Kyle smiled against Soren's skin. Then he lowered his mouth to the scent gland on Soren's neck, the gland that had been weakening for years, and pressed his claiming bite with all the tenderness and conviction he possessed. Soren gasped. His body arched. The monitors screamed, alarms blaring as his heart rate spiked and his pheromone output surged with a strength it had not shown in years. Honey ginger erupting through the room like a dam breaking. For one extraordinary moment, Soren Park's failing body blazed with life, every system firing in recognition of its mate, and the bond locked into place with a resonance that Coyle felt in the deepest architecture of himself. Then Soren bit him back, his teeth finding the gland on Coyle's neck with an accuracy that belied his weakness, and Coyle felt the bond complete. A golden thread strung between two hearts, a bridge built across the space where separation used to live, and suddenly he could feel Soren. Not just his scent, not just his proximity, but his emotions, his pain, his joy, his fear, his love, all of it flowing through the bond like water through a river, and it was overwhelming and beautiful, and it was breaking Cale's heart because he could also feel, underneath all of it, the fraying. The places where Soren's body was coming apart. The weakness in the foundation. The countdown that no amount of love could stop. They held each other afterward, Soren's head on Coyle's chest, their scents permanently mingled now, two fragrances that would never fully separate again. Soren's hand rested over Coyle's heart, feeling it beat, and Coyle's arms wrapped around Soren's narrow frame, holding him together in all the ways that mattered and none of the ways that could save him. The decline accelerated, just as the doctors had warned. The bond, for all its beauty, was another assault on Soren's immune system. His body fought the bond hormones the way it fought everything else, with indiscriminate violence, and Soren spent more days in bed, more hours on oxygen, more energy simply existing, but he did not regret it. Cole could feel that through the bond, a certainty that ran deeper than words. Soren Park did not regret a single moment. May arrived, and with it the understanding that the end was close. Soren's doctors gathered in the hallway and spoke in hushed voices that Cale could hear through the bond even when he could not hear through the walls. Weeks, they said. Not months. Weeks. Soren knew. He had always known his own body better than anyone, and the bond gave him access to Coyle's grief, which reflected back to him a truth he could no longer deny. He spent his remaining good hours painting. Not Cale this time, but the 67 places he would never see. Rendered in watercolors that grew more luminous as his hands grew weaker. Iceland's northern lights in washes of green and violet. A Parisian cafe in warm sienna, a Japanese temple in mist, a beach in Greece at sunset, the water impossibly blue. He painted with a desperation that was indistinguishable from joy, and Coyle sat beside him and watched and felt through the bond the exact texture of Soren's piece. It was not resignation. It was completion. "I need you to do something for me," Soren said one afternoon. His voice was thinner now, breathier, the effort of speaking visible in his chest. "Anything. When I am gone, I need you to go to those places. All 67 of them. And I need you to take these paintings with you and hold them up against the real thing and see how close I got." "Soren, I am serious. I want to know if I got the colors right. You will have to check for me." "How will I tell you?" "You will know. I will be paying attention." Cale pressed his face into Soren's hair, breathing in the scent that was barely there anymore, a whisper of honey, a ghost of ginger, and he held on. Soren Park died on a Tuesday in late May. 210 days after a man in a charcoal suit had stood in the courtyard below his window and cried where he thought no one could see him. It was early morning, the light just beginning to turn the sky that particular shade of blue that Soren had always said was his favorite color. The blue that happened 10 minutes before sunset. Except this time, it was dawn, and the blue was a beginning instead of an ending. Or maybe it was both. Cale was there. Of course he was there. He had not left the hospital in 4 days, sleeping in the visitor's chair, eating what the nurses brought him, refusing to be anywhere else. He felt it through the bond before the monitors registered it. A softening, a letting go. Not sudden, not violent, but gentle. Like a hand unclenching. Like a breath released after being held too long. Soren opened his eyes. They were clear, remarkably clear, and he looked at Cale with an expression that the bond translated as love so vast it had its own geography. Cale, I am here. I know. You are always here. A pause. A breath. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. I got the colors right, Soren whispered. Didn't I? Cale took his hand. You got everything right. Soren smiled. It was the same smile from the kitchenette, the first one, brief and reluctant and genuine, and it rearranged his face the same way it had that morning 7 months ago, from striking to beautiful, and Cale held on to it with everything he had. 7:15, Soren murmured, and his eyes drifted closed. I will be there. The monitors changed their song. The steady beep became a tone, long and unbroken, and the scent of honey and white ginger flared one final time, filling the room with a warmth that had no medical explanation, before fading to something that was not absence exactly, but stillness. Cale sat with Soren's hand in his for a long time after. The nurses came and went. Forms were signed. The morning light crept across the floor, painting the room in that impossible blue, and Cale pressed his lips to the bond mark on Soren's neck, the mark that would fade now, the thread that was unraveling, and he whispered into the silence all the things that Soren already knew. June found Cale in his office 6 weeks later, sorting through a box that had been delivered from the hospital. Inside were Soren's paintings, all of them. The 67 places and the portraits of Kyle and the small watercolor cards he had made for the nurses and the final painting. The one Soren had finished on his last good day, which was the courtyard garden in spring. Cherry blossoms, the Japanese maple in full leaf, and 2 figures on a bench seen from above, one broad-shouldered and one slight, sitting close enough that their silhouettes merged into a single shape. On the back, in handwriting that trembled but did not falter, Soren had written, View from room 418, my favorite place I have ever been. Kyle hung the painting in his office, above the desk where he ran an empire, and every morning when the light hit it at 7:15, the colors blazed to life in a way that felt deliberate, like someone was paying attention. He kept his promise. Over the following year, Cale traveled to all 67 places on Soren's list. He held each painting up against the real thing, Icelandic auroras and Parisian cafes and Greek sunsets, and he noted in a leather journal which colors Soren had gotten exactly right and which ones he had made more beautiful than reality, which was most of them. In Kyoto, standing before a temple in morning mist, Kyle opened the journal to write his notes, and a cherry blossom petal fell from between the pages. He had not put it there. He pressed it back between the pages and closed the book and stood in the mist and felt, just for a moment, the faintest trace of honey and ginger on the breeze. It was probably nothing. It was probably the wind, or memory, or the way grief plays tricks on a body that still remembers what love smells like. But Cale smiled, because Soren Park had been right about one thing. He was paying attention. He had always been paying attention, and somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond hospital rooms and failed biology and the cruel mathematics of time, an omega with dark eyes and a cat mug and the steadiest hands that ever trembled, was watching, and the colors were exactly right. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.